that I highlighted for you earlier. In this case, the wind has shifted, is blowing now to the northeast, and is covering the city, blanking the city in black smoke.
Okay, we're ready for a question. Yes, sir.
You said that the Iraqi army was in full retreat. Does that include the Republican Guards? Have they now come out of their fortifications, and are they trying to get north into Iraq?
In some cases they have, in some cases they haven't. When I said the Iraqi army is in full retreat, I meant over the theater. There are units that are still in position, still offering organized resistance. They are being engaged and defeated as we get to them.
Has this great tank battle that we all had envisioned of the U.S. armored forces coming down on the Republican Guard, has that begun yet?
There has not been a great tank battle. General Nielsen this morning that there was a tank battle going on in the southeast in the vicinity of Kuwait City at the airport, and incidentally that's quieted down now. I believe it's just after 11 o'clock at night over there. The other great tank battle has not materialized yet, and whether it will or not remains to be seen. We're hitting pieces of those organizations, and they're being dispatched as that happens.
General?
On the end.
General Kelly, due to the fact that the Iraqi army is in full retreat, and there's so much, I noticed many of the soldiers had a lot of euphoria and almost disappointment to the fact that they did not get a chance to engage the enemy. Do you feel that there's a possibility or potential for some abuse here, and that how will the Pentagon manage this and control many of those, jubilant, young soldiers out there on the battlefield?
The ones who were saying that they felt bad because they hadn't run into the enemy are the lucky ones. I think that we're making great efforts to properly care for the Iraqis who come into our control. I will assure you that they're better off once we control them than they were before we control them. It's the mission of the chain of command to make sure that that deprivations do not concur. I'm certain that all leaders have been briefed on that, and they're watching it very closely, and we know of none to this point. Yes, sir.
General, can you tell me if there was any participation by the 1st Ranger Regiment in the capture of the airfield or the attack on Kuwait City?
No, I can't tell you that. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that the engagement at the Kuwait airfield has quieted down. Has that been resulted in a victory for the Marines and the Allied forces? Is the airfield in Allied control, and what about Kuwait City itself?
That's undetermined right now. Tomorrow is going to come. When the sun comes up, the question in my mind will be, will the enemy still be there? But it had gotten dark, and both sides broke off. And I would tell you that the U.S. forces in that area are getting pretty tired right now. They've been attacking constantly for 3 days, so they probably need a little rest.
General, what about the rest of Kuwait City? Are there still Iraqi forces in the city itself, or is the airport as close as they're still located?
We don't know if there are Iraqi forces inside Kuwait City. I'm sure I heard the same television conversations that you did. We have not entered Kuwait City yet. I think that that's going to occur shortly. When we, the coalition, do enter Kuwait City, it will be with great care, because just a handful of people inside a city can cause you a lot of problems, and there could be casualties. So we'll be prudent when we go in there. Yes,
General,
sir.
does it appear now that there will be a large tank engagement with the Republican Guard, or are you suggesting that the engagements we have had are those where they're being destroyed in their bunkers? Might we avoid a large tank engagement with them?
There have been tank engagements with the Republican Guard. In each case, the result has been a very positive one for us. Whether there'll be a major tank engagement with them, whether they'll come out with large numbers of tanks, is something that lies in the future. I don't know. I do know that when they come out of their bunkers, they subject themselves not only to friendly ground forces and friendly tank-killing helicopters, but also friendly air forces. So they'd have to think pretty hard before they do that, and I'd like to ask Admiral McConnell if he wants to add anything to that.
Just what has been detected with regard to movement. There has been some movement. We thought initially movement to engage, then it appeared they moved back to go into defensive position. So I think there's a certain element of confusion on their part right now. They're sensing the battlefield, and they're finding pressure from all sides. So I think they're making some choices now.
Is it too fast and furious for them? Is that the problem, General Kelly, and just the tempo of the battle?
It's hard to tell what it is for them, although I think they've run into something that they couldn't conceive of before this battle began. Yes, sir.
General, can you characterize for us how the Iraqi people in southern Iraq, as the U.S. forces have moved through not only desert but agricultural areas now. What's been the reaction by the Iraqi people to the U.S. force?
Don't have any reports at all on that, and I don't know for a fact that they have run through civilian areas to this point.
And what's the highest ranking Iraqi defector, line crosser, or prisoner that we have in custody now?
Colonel.
General,
Yes, ma'am.
have the troops, the Iraqi troops that are defending the coast against an amphibious assault, have they begun to retreat, and would that have any impact on our amphibious activity?
Of course, we're not going to discuss whether or not we'll have an amphibious activity. Yes, in point of fact, they have begun to retreat. Yes, ma'am.
General, without saying exactly where our troops are, is it possible for the Republican Guards to retreat up north? Can they escape?
All things are possible. Some of them are more difficult than others, and incidentally, we expect there will be a briefing, a tactical briefing from the theater probably tomorrow, so they'll be able to answer that more.
Can you say whether we've completed the encirclement of southern Iraq?
That's what I didn't say when I answered you the first time. Yes,
Hey, General, what can you tell us? What happens if the Republican Guard decide to stay inside their defensive dug-in positions? Do you plan on going in and after them, or do you just plan on encircling them, waiting for them to come out?
Well, we will deal with the Republican Guards whether they're in their defensive positions or not. If they elect to stay in their defensive positions and get close up on American combat forces, they're in deep, deep trouble, because now you have the precision air attacks, now you have the attack helicopters, now you have the precision tank fires and ground missile fires like the TOW and others. So that would be pretty tough for them if they want to stay there.
Have you taken any Republican Guard prisoners yet?
I don't know specifically of any Republican Guard prisoners. It's possible, but I just don't know for a fact. Yes.
Just following on that, in light of how little resistance has been encountered in this ground war, including the much established Republican Guard and the threat that they were going to present to our troops, the question is, where is the fight in this army, and what's happened to it, or did it ever have it to begin with?
They're all good questions. Probably better addressed at Saddam Hussein than me. I know our guys are doing good, and I also know that what they didn't know before the fact is that they're running into the finest military force on earth, one that's worked very hard over a long period of time, and one that's fully capable of closing with the enemy and capturing them or destroying them using the shock action firepower.
But why do you think they are not fighting back aggressively?
Well, they've been bombed for 41 days now. They've had a debilitating war with Iran for over 8 years, where they lost a couple of 100,000, I think, killed. It's possible they're battle weary. I don't know. I can't tell you what's in the heart of the Kuwaitis. I can tell you that many of the prisoners who've already been taken have been quite grateful that their phase of this campaign is over.
Are you surprised by the lack of resistance you're encountering?
Pleasantly.
General, for Admiral McConnell,
just one more thing.
If I could offer a follow-up to the line of questioning. We worked very hard to measure bomb damage assessment and share with you the methodology and so on. And I think perhaps what we're saying is that the delivery of the precision weapons against dug-in forces probably had more impact than we could measure in real time. So as we move closer, as the General says, 41 days of bombing with this kind of precision, it's had a tremendous impact. Now, I'd offer one other comment. The battlefield is confused right now on the part of the Iraqis. They're having difficulty sensing from which direction they might be attacked.
Yes, sir.
For Admiral McConnell, for the past several days we've heard reports of continuing Iraqi atrocities in Kuwait City. Can you describe some of them? And I know you won't describe your sources, but can you say whether there's anything to corroborate these reports other than the Kuwaiti resistance?
The vast majority of the information has been from Kuwaiti resistance. There's been some corroborating information, and you've seen the same descriptions that I have. It's been announced on television and so on, but rounding up of relatively young men, rape, decapitation of women, summarily executing youngsters in front of their parents. Those are the reports. Hopefully they're not as bad as we've heard, but as we move closer, we're probably going to find out.
Is there any independent corroboration of the killings, at least?
Not yet.
No.
General. Yes, sir. Second one.
No, could you draw any distinction between the fighting inside Kuwait and the fighting in Iraq? Has there been any difference in the character of resistance and the success of the U.S. forces on the ground table?
Well, to the best best of my knowledge, as a matter of fact, the fighting against the Republican Guards hasn't been any stiffer than the fighting against anybody else over there. So it looks like a piece of whole cloth. Although a lot of divisions inside Kuwait proper have been declared combat ineffective, I think most of them are infantry, dismounted infantry divisions.
Just to follow up to that, to what extent are you administering the territory which you're taking, assuming that some of it is populated, even if only by a few Iraqis? Who is governing them? Who's in charge in this territory?
We're not administering any territory inside Iraq. We're taking measures to protect our force inside Iraq and Kuwait, and we're not into military government. Yes, ma'am.
General, could you...
Go ahead.
You mentioned that you've got some captured documents. Can you tell us at all what you think the forces are being told, if anything? You mentioned a confused situation on the battlefield. Are there orders to resist going out? Are they being told to retreat to Basra? What are they being
The document that I mentioned is dated. It was instructions to the Corps commanders dated the 17th of January. Remember, that's the day that the bombing campaign started. And it was general instructions about how to fight the battle. My reference to confusion is what we can sense on the battlefield right now. We've apparently been very effective in damaging their ability to communicate and to coordinate. So they are confused with regard to what the threat is on the left or the right or the front or the back.
Could they even set up an organized withdrawal if they wanted to?
They're trying to right now, and we're helping them in being unsuccessful in that. Yes, sir.
On what happened with the Scud yesterday, after 40 or so successful Scud launches, was there complacency by the troops? Did something happen? Was there a mistake made, or can you tell us what happened?
I think there was clearly not complacency. There is an investigation ongoing in Saudi Arabia right now. I don't know what the facts are, so it would be wrong of me to conjecture. I am certain that the results of that investigation will be made known as soon as it's completed, just as we have with the other unfortunate incidents that have occurred.
There are reports in Ohio and Pennsylvania newspapers saying that only 3 families of the 28 dead have been notified at this point as of this morning. Is there a problem reaching these families, or is there something that you can tell us about that?
Not to my knowledge. The initial major effort, of course, was put into trying to save those who were still alive and trying to take care of those who were dead. I'm sure the notifications will proceed quite reasonably, and I hope what you're saying is good news for some of the families there.
Is that unusually slow?
No, I wouldn't think so.
General Admiral, can you tell us what's the situation with Hussein and his high command? Where are they? And there's a report today that Hussein has a jet ready to go. Will you get him?
A, to the best of our knowledge, he's still in the vicinity of Baghdad. B, we would not conjecture on what we would do if he tried to get out of the country.
Are jets that fly, are Iraqi jets that fly in the area still being targeted?
Of course. Yes, by all means, absolutely. Yes, sir. Get over here now.
General Kelly, what are your major concerns right now? What could still go wrong?
There could be a concerted attack on the part of the Republican Guard and other forces that are still in the theater. Remember, they represent a viable military force, so we have to be very vigilant to make sure that doesn't happen. We are being very vigilant to make sure that doesn't happen. We have to be careful that units that appear to be retreating, and this has happened before, don't turn around and start shooting at us. We will be careful of that. So I think the major concern is keep our guard up and make sure we don't let down, and we're not going to let down.
What about chemical weapons?
We have not seen chemical weapons used to date. There have been no indications, don't think, in the theater that they're present. However, during the Iran-Iraq War, a technique that they used was to pull their forces back when they were getting ready to use chemical weapons. So, again, we'll remain vigilant there. Go ahead.
Just to offer a follow-up, what could happen. Recall the Republican Guard is reportedly the best. There are 8 divisions, and they're all located just outside Kuwait along the northern border. That's 3 armored, 4 infantry, and 1 special forces division. So it is not, that element has not been defeated, so they could certainly mount some kind of an attack.
General? Let me just clarify one thing. I mentioned an A6 was shot down in my initial briefing. I'm told that's not correct, so I'll get you an update on that and give it to you as soon as I get it.
General?
You want to follow up? Yeah, go ahead.
Is it true, Admiral, that the Republican Guard is deployed on his own exercise grounds over there?
I'm sorry, on what?
I've heard stories according to which the Republican Guard is deployed on the area where they've been exercising for years, and the place has been very well prepared for that.
They have exercised in the place in which they're currently located, that's correct.
General, for a long period of time, but we feel fully confident that we can deal with that. Yes, sir.
Has there been any evidence of any Iraqi units that have followed President Bush's prescription and have attempted to withdraw without their weapons?
There are many examples of Iraqi units that have laid down their weapons and surrendered.
I understand that, but are any trying to just walk back north?
Not to my knowledge. Do you know one? No. Yes, sir, over here.
Can you assess the damage to the Kuwaiti oil production facilities? I mean, how long will it take to put out these oil well fires? What percentage of wells have been set afire? What will it do to their production ability?
Well, this is about half of the oil wells in Kuwait, and a lot of the infrastructure has been damaged, the gathering centers, the oil tanks, and so on. So we're talking probably months to years to totally recover, and we're talking weeks to months to put out the fires.
Yes, ma'am.
General, have the goals of the war changed since you've had such battlefield success? And did you always intend to take a portion of Iraqi territory and hold it as a negotiating tool?
We have not taken a portion of Iraqi territory to hold. We are maneuvering on Iraqi territory because our mission was to drive the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. Our mission has not changed. If you want to talk about goals, go ask, National Security Council or the State Department. But our mission has not changed. That's to drive the Iraqi army out of Kuwait, and that's what we're doing. Yes,
General, we know you're not in the business of releasing
Mike
body
McConnell in their
counts.
afternoon briefing to the press on the theater of operations today, with 30,000 prisoners of war taken already, oil fires going, half of the oil installations in Kuwait damaged, says Admiral McConnell, weeks and months yet to do it. The Republican Guards, some still in positions and being defeated, General Kelly said, as U.S. forces get to them. No great tank battle as yet, but there was something of a dust-up at the Kuwait International Airport with the U.S. Marines and the Iraqis. The general says that has quieted down for the moment. They haven't entered Kuwait City. That is to say, the Marines, U.S. forces, have not entered the Kuwait City. He said the soldiers, the troops, were tired after 3 days of fairly constant fighting, and so that both sides had broken off the engagement, at least for now. Admiral McConnell said a couple of times there the Iraqis are confused about where the battle is being carried to them. We've heard that since the beginning, try to keep the Iraqis guessing as to whether it's coming from the left or the right. The Iraqi troops which were on the coast, anticipating an amphibious operation also by the Marines at sea, have been retreating. The Republican Guard has been trying in some cases, General Kelly said, to retreat north, but he said it is hard, with a smile on his face, leading us to at least speculate on the possibility that other U.S. forces have come in behind them and are providing the essence of a blocking action so they cannot retreat north to Iraq. Let's ask someone who knows a good deal more than we do, Tony Cordesman, whether you think, Tony, that is a reasonable supposition.
I think it is indeed, Peter, and we need to again perhaps move to one of the maps we have to see exactly what's happening. We know that they've lost, if the reports are correct, 50% of their divisions, 50% of their tanks, and 50% of their artillery. But the critical battle for Kuwait is ultimately, in a lot of ways, the battle for Kuwait Bay and for Kuwait City and Al-Jara. And the reason is this. There's only one really major road north. All of the retreating Iraqi troops have to feed through this road net. And unless they can somehow hold this area here with their forces.
This area where here? Show us the here. Okay.
They've got to defend the road junctions here. They've got to have some ability to go up the coastal road. They've got to defend the ability to get their forces in the other parts of Iraq and move them eventually through and up to the north, or they've effectively lost the army almost totally. More importantly, this is their last real way to have a political impact on the battle, and let's zoom in and see why the airport is so important.
Tony, as you're zooming in to have a look at the airport, let's point out that the Kuwaiti government in exile said in Saudi Arabia just a little while ago that the Iraqis had already pulled out of Kuwait City.
No more, please.
The airport is outside the city, but the people have pulled out of Kuwait City itself. How is this going to affect the final battle?
Well, that's absolutely right, Peter. And you can see what's happening here. This road may not look like it's terribly important, but this set of roads is the only way their forces to the south can really move out. The other thing is, if they're still holding the airport, at least to some extent, all of the people in the suburban area around it, the Kuwaitis, are some kind of hostage. But if they lose the airport, if they lose that road junction, not only can they no longer retreat, but even though this has unquestionably been cratered, hit by air attack, and again, perhaps we can zoom in a little closer and see just how big this airport really is.
Tony, I'm told that the U.S. Marines control that road junction to the western side of the highway. So don't the Iraqis already cut off?
That's very critical. If it's true, Peter, then yes, indeed. I mean, obviously, this is relatively flat terrain. Armies can still move, but it is amazing how much more slowly and inefficiently they move if they can't use the best roads.
Well, forgive me another layman's question, but what's the big deal over the fight for the airport there, other than it's a place for U.S. forces to land, visiting generals, more paratroopers, etc., if they want to come up from the south?
Well, Peter, you know, actually, it may sound strange, but the ability to get in and out of this with C-130s or helicopters, logistically, in terms of reinforcement, is very important. But what is also far more important is if their division has moved back into this position or brigade, and earlier we heard from General O'Neill that that was the size of the formation, it may well be the last formation there that can threaten the city and the Kuwaiti people.
Okay, Tony, let me stop you if I may there, because Baghdad is on the line. ABC's Bill Blakemore has about a minute left on the satellite to bring us up to date with what's happening there, Bill.
Peter, we've just been given another advisory by the Iraqi Ministry of Information. It's 2 sentences. It says, President Saddam Hussein toured this morning the 1st Iraqi Army Corps Operations Zone and met with its general. During the tour, he acquainted himself with the high preparedness of the fighters of the Corps to deter any aggression against Iraq. That's the whole communique. There may be some kind of acknowledgement here that Iraq is facing fighting on Iraqi soil, in that last phrase, deterring any aggression against Iraq. I can't be sure of that, but I thought at this point you might like to know that that's the latest communique we've gotten here at the Al Rashid Hotel.
Now, Bill, you also know that President Bush has found everything that President Hussein has said so far unacceptable. Any further indication he's going to comply with all the UN resolutions?
No, Peter, there really isn't. We haven't been traveling much out of the hotel since dark, of course, because there's been very heavy bombardment again here tonight, and we haven't had any further communiques other than this one I've just read you since soon after the speech this afternoon.
Okay, Bill, thanks very much. And we're told a little earlier by Bill and also by our radio monitoring stations outside Baghdad that they're playing popular music on the radio sometimes and playing over and over again the speech which Saddam Hussein said that he ordered his troops to withdraw from Kuwait under circumstances and conditions which President Bush and the other members of the Allied coalition have found unacceptable. Now let's go up to Boston to talk to retired Marine General Bernard Traynor. General Traynor, what do you hear in this news briefing this afternoon?
Well, we haven't heard much that we didn't get in the briefing from Riyadh this morning. Obviously, the battle is going well. Obviously, the Republican Guards are still intact and apparently still fighting, but clearly the...
Let me be more specific with you. If the Republican Guard is still fighting U.S. forces, the question is why?
Well, of course, they are loyal to Saddam Hussein, and one would expect elite forces to at least give a good account of themselves before they cave in.
Would they not have an appreciation of the overall battle circumstance?
Oh, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do, and that's why I say it's inconsequential as to what they do, because the cohesiveness of the Iraqi defenses have been destroyed, and the Republican Guards are doomed. They may be just acquitting themselves with honor. They may be trying to keep the escape route open for the rest of the Iraqi forces that are fleeing north through Basra. Any of these things are possible. On the other hand, we may not be giving them much of a chance to do anything other than to fight so that we can destroy them.
Exactly. Thanks very much, General Traynor. In fact, Tom Kelly, Lieutenant General Kelly, said at that briefing, when asked if the Republican Guard could retreat north, he looked steadily at his questioner and then said, "It is hard." One more question, General Traynor, very quickly. Is it all over?
It's all over, but the shouting, I would almost consider this, at least in the Kuwaiti theater, as a mopping up operation, where you're going to find pockets of resistance, but in terms of organized resistance, it's just about collapse.
And I think that report that came from Baghdad about Saddam Hussein touring the First Corps area, I don't know where the First Corps area is, but I suspect it is in Iraq itself, and apparently he's trying to create the illusion then that the Iraqis are successfully defending their homeland.
Thank you, General Trainer. You can see that inside Kuwait they have no longer any desire to defend Kuwait. Another visual example of the more than 30,000 Iraqis who have become American or Allied prisoners in the course of 2 days and 19 hours on the ground. And as we look at the circumstance of war there for the Iraqis, here are the overall casualty figures for Americans involved in this campaign since the very beginning, 40 days and 21 hours ago, as General Kelly issued them this afternoon. Overall, 55 Americans killed in action, 155 wounded, 30 are missing. I believe that figure on the screen is correct. 30 missing, and 9 of them prisoners of war. And of course, one of the conditions that Saddam Hussein did not indicate that he would meet today, which was why perhaps President Bush was so angry, may be too strong, but certainly vigorous, was he has not said anything about an immediate exchange of prisoners of war, which President Bush had demanded last weekend, which the Iraqis had ignored, which led within 24 hours to the beginning of the ground war, for which, as you can see, Iraq is paying in spades. We'll have a full report on World News tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm Peter Jennings in New York.
This has been a special report from ABC News on the Gulf War.
Was home to 2 million people. Many of them had fled since the war began. CBS News reporter Bob McEwen stopped to talk to some people on his way into Kuwait City. One man said that life under Iraqi occupation was worse than he could possibly describe.
They are not mad. They are like animals. What have they been doing? Everything. They are killing. They are everything do. You can't talk about them because they are not man. They are like animals.
Kuwait City is being described as a dark city. There's no electricity and little water. But today, after 7 months of invasion and occupation, it was a jubilant city. In his exclusive CBS News report, Bob McEwen said he had been kissed by more Kuwaitis than he could count. Relieved people gathered around him telling stories of Iraqi destruction. One man carrying an M16 rifle asked McEwen to come along to the U.S. Embassy.
If you come to Kuwait, you will say this is not Kuwait at all.
Why not?
Because Kuwait, you know, it's famous about the buildings and the streets, nice and clean. Never you saw such thing. Just these soldiers came to Kuwait, destroy everything you saw, destroy the men here, you know, anything they say you mention anything about Kuwait, they destroy. They don't keep anything for Kuwait.
There are some American Marines. They come to my to Sabahia city. I am living there. This is my city, and they are liberate us. And they told us you are free. So when the lieutenant there, he told me you can help me. We have to go to the American embassy to be inside tonight. I said, okay, that you liberate my country, I will liberate your embassy.
The man said that he was part of a small force that captured 400 Iraqi soldiers. He said that they were being held in the basement of a grocery store and that he'd let the Kuwaiti government decide what to do with them when it returned to power. While the first pictures out of a liberated Kuwait showed one of the most dramatic moments of the war, the surrender of thousands of Iraqi troops today is just as dramatic and stirring.
This was the brutal enemy that would fight to the death. Yet as they surrender, we see and hear them cry. Whether out of relief or mercy, they kiss the hands and the boots of their Allied captors.
No. Okay. All right. All right. You're all right.
They wave the pieces of paper dropped by Allied air jets that explain how to surrender as if they were passports to safety. They received the friendly treatment they were promised. But throughout the desert, the Iraqis, at first overcome by aerial bombardments, now overcome with emotional strain. It has been hell in the desert for these forward troops. Many never wanted to be in Kuwait.
I don't like Saddam Hussein, and I hate him. But I can do nothing, as a matter of fact.
The prisoners of war are getting food and water their own army could not provide them. The Allied troops are treating the seriously wounded, caring for POWs with neglected health problems, and even burying the Iraqi dead.
As we see the pictures of Iraqi troops surrendering, everybody wants to know, what are the Republican Guards? At this morning's briefing in Riyadh, the U.S. High Command was stingy with details of any face-off with Saddam's elite troops, but a Pentagon official says the Republican Guards have been engaged, and he says that Allied forces, quote, have them checkmated. The 150,000-strong Republican Guard force has been pounded from the air since the start of the war. This morning, in the White House Rose Garden, President Bush responded to Saddam Hussein's radio address announcing a withdrawal from Kuwait. The president rejected Saddam's proposal and said the liberation of Kuwait was close at hand.
The liberation of Kuwait is close at hand. And let me just add that I share the pride of all of the American people in the magnificent, heroic performance of our armed forces. May God bless them and keep them.
In Baghdad, the reaction was different. Citizens heard Saddam say that they had won the war. Betsy Aaron reports from Baghdad, but remember, her report has been heavily censored by Iraqi officials.
They listened to their president on car radios in the streets and in tea houses. Saddam Hussein ordering Iraqi troops out of Kuwait, the withdrawal to be completed today. Reason for the pullout, according to Saddam, our brave army has concluded its combat against aggression. It is the classic declaration of victory before defeat. Iraq has fought the 30 nations allied against them to a standstill, he said, and that is victory. Saddam, as commander-in-chief, then told his troops to remain on full alert while they withdraw, warning that the Allies may pursue them into Iraqi territory. During the 20-minute speech, an air raid siren, warning of another Allied raid over Baghdad, the 4th this morning. As Saddam continued, the resignation on Iraqi faces was clear. There were no surprises. Before the speech ended, the sounds of guns being fired into the air reverberated throughout the city. Perhaps in celebration of the victory declared by Saddam Hussein, or perhaps they were fired as a sign of relief that at last the war no one really seemed to want would come to an end. Betsy Aaron, CBS News, Baghdad.
In Great Britain, Prime Minister John Major once again stated the coalition's objectives and made no concessions to Saddam's speech, and once again backed the United States.
That does mean we require all Iraqi forces in the theater of operations, those occupying and those supporting the occupation of Kuwait, to abandon their weapons, their equipment, and withdraw. And until they do so, they will be treated as hostile. Saddam Hussein started this war on his terms. He must end it on the terms set out by the United Nations.
The Soviets have spent a lot of time and energy on trying to put together a peace proposal. Their reaction to Saddam's speech and how the coalition is reacting was strong. Jonathan Sanders reports from Moscow.
The Soviet Union's Deputy Foreign Minister, Alexander Belenogov, appeared before reporters today to make a case for a ceasefire. The announced withdrawal from Kuwait should satisfy everyone, he said, and it should prompt an end to the bloodshed. But he could not offer any independent evidence that an Iraqi withdrawal was underway. Could Saddam Hussein be trusted to be true to his word?
In this case, yes, I believe that he is sincere when he is saying to his own people that Iraqi forces are withdrawing from Kuwait. You can't mislead people on this point.
The Soviets themselves are trying very hard not to mislead anyone as they work as a peacemaker. Messages passed on to the Soviet embassy in Baghdad by the Iraqis are quickly relayed on to Washington. At least that's what they're saying in Moscow today. And Soviet officials are being very upfront in saying they don't want to see Iraq destroyed, politically or militarily. Jonathan Sanders, CBS News, Moscow.
U.S. casualties in the ground offensive are still being described as remarkably light. The heaviest American losses of the war happened at a place that was supposed to be out of harm's way. Today, people still sifting through the rubble of the barracks in Dhahran, where U.S. servicemen and women were hit by a Scud missile. The death toll now stands at 28. 100 people were hurt. Reports today that many of the dead were members of a reserve supply unit based in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. As the fighting continues in the Middle East, passions flared on the home front. Anti-war groups gathered at 6:30 this morning at the Federal Building in San Francisco. They were voicing their continuing disapproval of the U.S. involvement in the war. Some protesters say that the U.S. government is overstepping its stated goals in the Middle East.
Bush right now has kind of got a bloodlust, and he wants to just kill off any remnant of Hussein's army. So I don't know how soon it'll end. I don't know.
About 800 to 1,000 protesters showed up in all. There were no arrests. By 8:30, some of the demonstrators left the Federal Building and marched downtown. And just a programming note, because of the extraordinary developments in the Gulf War, we are going to be changing our lineup. Here's how it goes. Today at 4 o'clock, there is going to be a CBS War Special, followed by Eyewitness News at 5 o'clock, then CBS News at 5:30, and Eyewitness News at 6 o'clock. Of course, we'll have special reports throughout the day as necessary. When we come back, a look at local news.
At 6.
Good evening. I'm Ana Chavez.
And I'm Richard Brown. Pentagon sources at this hour say the biggest battle of the ground war may now be underway. Allied tanks, led by Americans, are taking on the Iraqi Republican Guard on the outskirts of Kuwait City. The sources say the battlefront is dozens of miles wide. That fierce fighting contrasts to the almost eerie silence inside Kuwait City, free in the eyes of its citizens for the first time in almost 7 months. Some of the citizens of Kuwait City proclaimed this a new Independence Day as troops and reporters rolled into a mostly desolate town. These pictures, taken with a night scope, show abandoned tanks and other military vehicles as the Iraqi army apparently fled quickly. But leaders of the Kuwaiti resistance here say those troops took hundreds of hostages with them and that some of them were being tortured. Allied forces are now said to be racing through eastern Iraq trying to cut off those retreating troops. But though there has continued to be sporadic fighting, the main contact with enemy troops has been with their hands up. More than 30,000 Iraqi soldiers have now given up. Pentagon officials are uniformly upbeat.
The Iraqi army is in full retreat.
They're stopping to fight, and they're giving it their best shot, but it's not even close to what they're meeting up against in the way of U.S. and coalition forces.
What they're getting now is a massive attack on their tanks. Fully half of Iraq's tanks have been knocked out, according to the Allies. One team of pilots of A-10 Warthog tank killers destroyed 23 Iraqi tanks in 1 day. The military says that has to be a record.
We found them and sorted it all out, sectored the target area, and we were in and had tanks burning within 5 minutes.
Cleanup continued in one successful attack by Iraqi forces to date. Yesterday's Scud missile that slammed into a military barracks in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. The death toll now stands at 28, mainly reservists from a small town in Pennsylvania who were not expected to see combat. The flags in that small town are out in force as families wait for word on who lived and who died.
Disbelief, shock, it brought the war a little closer to home.
But the eyes of the world are looking elsewhere, to Kuwait City. Outside the city, Allied troops are trying to engage the Republican Guard in tank battles or hand-to-hand fighting. Inside the city, the refugees of war offer greetings. Pentagon sources say there is now a driving rainstorm in northern Kuwait, but nonetheless, Apache helicopters have joined the battle against the Republican Guard tanks. They also report that 50 Iraqi tanks trying to make a getaway into Iraq were intercepted and captured late today. Anna?
Plans for the rebuilding of Kuwait began almost immediately after the Iraqi invasion on August 2nd. A reconstruction task force has already signed more than 200 contracts with major companies in Japan, Germany, and here in the U.S. Channel 7's Paul Jeske has more.
The desert dust hasn't settled and the smoke certainly hasn't cleared yet, but already plans for the rebuilding of Kuwait are well underway. There are preliminary estimates that it will cost $200 billion to put the shattered sheikdom together again. And despite what you hear about reparations, Iraq won't necessarily foot the bill.
An International Court of Justice will award billions of dollars of damages to Israel, to the Kuwaitis, the Kuwaiti people, and to damage in Saudi Arabia and other damages to the people. But the UN or the International Court of Justice has no guidelines or provisions under which those reparations payments will actually physically be turned over.
San Leandro-based radar devices, a pioneer in satellite communication systems, has already negotiated a big contract to provide communications equipment.
We can install a satellite communication terminal on the roof of a building in a matter of hours, and they can call out worldwide for as low as $30,000 per system.
Probably the biggest chunk of money will go for the immediate rebuilding of Kuwait's oil and gas industry. The people here at San Francisco's Bechtel Corporation are at work on the planning for that project now. And word is the Kuwaitis have essentially given them a blank check. In San Francisco, Paul Jeske, Channel 7 News.
AT&T, General Motors, and Caterpillar are among the U.S. companies that have also signed contracts. And the Army Corps of Engineers will receive $46 million for helping the Kuwaitis redesign their entire infrastructure. For days, reporters have been describing the choking, oily smoke that hangs over the Persian Gulf region. Tonight, there is official confirmation that half of Kuwait's oil fields are on fire. Pentagon officials are saying it could take years for the environment to recover, and they estimate it could take months for the fires to be put out.
A Bay Area reservist court-martial for desertion has been sentenced to 10 months in prison. Lance Corporal Douglas Scheil, who's from Livermore, will also be busted to private and given a dishonorable discharge. Last December, the California reservist refused to join his unit when it was deployed in the support role for Operation Desert Storm. Hundreds of anti-war demonstrators rallied in downtown San Francisco today in a continuing protest against the Gulf War.
No way! The federal building is closed today! No war! No way! The federal building is closed!
They tried unsuccessfully to blockade the federal building in a 3.5-hour protest. Police report 64 people arrested. Some of the protesters broke away from the main demonstration and marched to the Chevron building, where they staged a sit-down protest.
Floor. More than 30,000 Iraqi soldiers have now surrendered. Kuwait, it seems, was not worth fighting for.
From ABC, this is a special edition of World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. When Lieutenant General Thomas Kelly, the Director of Operations, was asked at the Pentagon today, where's the fight in the Iraqi army, he said, they have run into the finest army in the world. And he added, 41 days of Allied bombing. With rare exceptions on the battlefield tonight, the Iraqi military qualifies for the description paper tiger. There is fight left in some units, but in almost every case, the U.S. and its allies have apparently accomplished their individual objectives. The war is not over. For one thing, there's been a serious fight between U.S. and Iraqi forces around the Kuwait International Airport. But the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait City has been visited by U.S. Marines, and ABC's Forrest Sawyer has arrived in Kuwait City as well. We talked to him less than an hour ago. Forrest, you've been in Kuwait City for several hours now. What's your strongest impression?
That the city is absolutely deserted, so it appears. I am told that there are a number of Kuwaitis who are inside their homes. They have been afraid to come out now, and they have been told by Kuwaiti resistance members to remain inside their homes until the city is absolutely secure by Saudi and American forces. For now, it is a ghost town that has been torn apart by the Iraqi forces.
Now, you've obviously met up with the Kuwaiti resistance. Tell us about them.
Well, they have been here for a long time. I am standing, Peter, on the roof of a Kuwaiti resistance member's home. This is a secure place for us. In one of the rooms, he has piled up sugar and detergent, a number of things that they pass out to people. The Kuwaiti resistance has been hard at work here, though they are a small number. And we went to one of their hideouts, I guess you might say, which is a basement of a suburban home. There they had 18 prisoners from Iraq, many of whom said that one of the reasons that they decided to give up, in fact, one of the biggest reasons, was because they had been bombed so heavily by the Allies.
So is the Kuwaiti resistance in charge of the city?
I guess as far as anybody is in charge, you could say that. one of our crew actually drove by some Iraqi soldiers who were still armed and tried to wave them down and make them stop. They quickly moved on. When I asked about our own security and their security when we were here, whether that caused a problem, he said, well, they used to be the policemen and we were the thieves, and now we are the policemen and they are the thieves.
Had you actually then seen evidence of Iraqis still in the streets in any fashion whatsoever?
Well, I haven't, but as I say, my crew was out driving around and drove directly by them. They were armed, they tried to stop them, and they kept moving by.
In the several hours you've been there, any signs of actual fighting?
We have seen a dead Iraqi soldier who was just on the outskirts of town, but for the most part, we are told by the Kuwaiti resistance here that overnight, the Iraqi soldiers, perhaps on some signal, piled into Kuwaiti vehicles and headed out of town. They believe that they went north. And so while they were soldiers one day, the very next day, they were simply gone.
Aside from the damage that has been done by the Allied bombing campaign, what evidence is there that the Iraqis have cut and run so?
Considerable evidence, Peter. There are caches of weapons that have been simply left standing. At the hideout that our crew visited, they were piled up right there where the Kuwaitis were able to show them. And at a police station that I visited, equally large caches of weapons. Those were heavy ammunition and rifles, all sorts of things that had simply been left while they disappeared. In fact, tanks have been left sitting in the middle of the street while they ran away.
Tell us a little more about the Iraqi prisoners. Have you had a chance to talk to them?
I did talk to them. In fact, I talked with 13 prisoners who were kept in a cell at a Kuwaiti police station that had been used as a headquarters for the Iraqis. And they said that they hated Saddam, that they had been forced to be here, that they were very hungry, they were very tired, and they were very glad that for them, at least, all of this is over.
I get the sense you've managed to travel around the city to some extent. How widely? For example, have you been over to the embassy at all?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I did go to the U.S. Embassy. There is no one there. However, U.S. Special Forces, a U.S. Special Forces team of about 10 men was there. They were told to move to the Saudi Arabian Embassy, where they joined a Saudi Arabian Special Forces team. Neither of those teams has been allowed to go into their respective embassies. That is to take place at a later time. The Americans had a flag that they could have flown over the embassy, but they did not. They are waiting. Over the embassy right now, a flag is flying. I have seen it. I do not know whether it's an American flag or another one, the same, I can say, for the Saudi Arabian embassy. Some flags are there. Which they are, I don't know.
What other evidence have you come upon of U.S. forces actually in the city?
That is all of the evidence I have come upon of U.S. forces. As for Saudi forces, I saw an armored personnel carrier that was tracking by, I guess, about 50 yards from where I was standing with an Egyptian, Lebanese, and an Indian group of families, about 6 of them. They were the first people we had come across, and I have never seen such jubilation and exhilaration as seeing people come in from the outside in my entire life, Peter.
Tell me more about that.
This was the first place that we drove in, and we passed all of these burned vehicles and empty stores that had been burned, debris scattered everywhere. We saw a light over in a deserted building. They began to shout something at us. I asked, "Who are you?" And they said, "We are Egyptians, we are Lebanese, and we're glad you're here." They welcomed us into their home, and actually in front of our cameras began shouting and dancing and being delirious at the fact that their long 7-month nightmare had come to an end.
Now, how do the Kuwaitis, I think I know the answer to this, but how do the Kuwaitis feel at being liberated, those you've come across?
They are equally exuberant. One rather telling phrase, the man whose house this is, as a matter of fact, said to me, "We went to sleep Iraqis, and when we awoke, we were Kuwaitis again." I don't believe that they've seen a happier day in their lives.
One of the reasons Forrest looks like that is because it is the middle of the night in Kuwait City. He looks green on your screen because he's being shot with what we call a night scope, so they don't have to use lights because it's still a fairly potentially dangerous situation. At any rate, in just 24 hours, there have been some dramatic changes, as you can see there, and also in what the military calls the dynamics of the battlefield. For one thing, advance elements of both U.S. and British forces are said to have swept across Iraq in the direction of Basra, all the way to the Euphrates River. That should effectively trap Iraq's Republican Guards, who were fanned out along the Kuwaiti-Iraqi frontier. French forces are right next to them, in part to serve as a blocking force, lest any Iraqi elements try to attack from the north. In Kuwait itself, the 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions, which drove north across the Saudi border, have now turned east to converge on Kuwait City itself. And finally, On a broad front all across the Kuwaiti frontier, from the coast to the border with Iraq, other Marines are advancing with units from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar. An American colonel on the battlefield said, Iraqi troops are coming out all over the place with their hands up. It is incredible. But that does not mean that all Iraqi troops are giving up without a fight. Here's ABC's Bill Redeker.
The Iraqi army may be retreating, but it is firing on its way out.
We have seen no indication that they are laying down their weapons and walking or getting back to the Iraq border. Quite the opposite.
As they drive north to encircle Republican Guard positions and then destroy Iraq's best forces, the Allies claim they have destroyed 2,000 tanks since the war began and defeated 21 Iraqi divisions. That's a force of more than 200,000 soldiers, mostly infantry, but still roughly half of Iraq's army in Kuwait.
We're not here to try to kill the Iraqi soldiers. We're here to try to get the terrain and free Kuwait back up.
While Marine tanks stormed north and fought a pitched battle near the international airport in Kuwait City, attack helicopters and A-10 tank killers leapfrogged ahead to hit Republican Guard artillery and tanks near the Iraqi border. This pilot said he destroyed a dozen tanks in 3 missions.
It's the biggest 4th of July show you've ever seen. And to see those tanks just boom, and more stuff just keeps spewing out of them, and the shells flying on the ground, and they just become white hot.
Iraqi bunkers, some loaded with military equipment, were blown up by Army airborne units.
I don't think we should just call it quits now. We've really been moving in. We've had a lot of success.
Earlier, Iraqi soldiers emerged from the holes. Some of them had been dug in for 6 months and endured constant aerial bombardment for the past 5 weeks. Their strain gave way to pleas of mercy as they kissed the hand of an armed Marine public affairs officer who tried to calm them down. Field commanders today said they were losing track of how many Iraqis they had taken prisoner. At least 30,000 had been rounded up by late today, but the number continued to grow. Late today, it began to rain, and that could delay critical fuel and ammunition from reaching frontline Allied forces. At this Army airborne base, all supply flights were canceled.
We've had visibilities that have gone down to about a half a mile visibility, and with that we've been forecasting light to occasional moderate turbulence, which of course is going to have an effect on aircraft. So are the visibilities, and so are the gusty winds.
Military sources also warned that a logistical logjam near the front could slow down the Allied campaign. Support units are reportedly having problems in keeping up with fast-moving troops and armor. Tonight, Central Command will not speculate on when the war may be over. As one general said, we will continue to attack, attack, attack. Bill Redeker, ABC News, Saudi Arabia.
Saddam Hussein tried to end the war earlier today. He was on the radio overnight saying that the withdrawal of all his troops from Kuwait would be completed by tonight. He was wrong. President Bush responded by saying Saddam is not interested in peace, but only to regroup and fight another day. At the White House, ABC's Britt Hume.
4 days ago, the president prepared a statement in the Oval Office, much as he did today. In it, he offered to hold off a ground assault if Saddam would accept all UN resolutions and withdraw from Kuwait in a week. But that was then, and this is now, and Saddam's order to his forces to retreat did him no good today.
Saddam's most recent speech is an outrage. He is not withdrawing. His defeated forces are retreating. He is trying to claim victory in the midst of a rout. And he is not voluntarily giving up Kuwait. The coalition will therefore continue to prosecute the war with undiminished intensity.
The president got a briefing on the progress of the war today from Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Powell, who told him elite Republican Guard units in southern Iraq have been trapped, cut off, and cannot escape with their armor. Powell also said armed Iraqi units attempting to leave Kuwait are under withering Allied attack. The president reacted to that briefing in a speech at nearby Fort Myer later.
We are not only on schedule, we're ahead of schedule. And no commander-in-chief has ever been so proud of America's men and women in uniform.
In the faces of the president's men today, you could see that, as one White House official put it, they were beginning to believe the news from the front. That was during a ceremony for visiting Colombian President Gaviria. Afterward, the focus returned to the Gulf and the task of dealing with a post-war Iraq the administration regretfully assumes will still be under the control of Saddam Hussein. Britt Hume, ABC News, the White House.
There's a lot more. We'll continue in just gone for the U.S. military. Yesterday, the casualty figures were 4 killed in action in the ground battle and 21 wounded. The figures today, 4 killed and 21 wounded. Nobody wounded or killed today. The difference is, of course, that Scud attack on eastern Saudi Arabia on Dhahran yesterday. The latest figures on that are 21 killed and 100 wounded. Now, to talk about the shape of battle, we're joined by our 2 military analysts, Tony Cordesman in Washington, and in Boston, former Marine General, retired Marine General Bernard Traynor. First to you, Tony Cordesman. Fairly simple question. You hear it from the military today. Is it over? And if it isn't over, what's the threat yet to come?
No, Peter, it's not over. I think that we've heard it again and again that we have to see how this ends, and it will end not in Kuwait or in Kuwait City, but somewhere in Iraq, along the Euphrates, and somewhere near Basra. If we can choke them off, the rest of those 21 divisions, which still have some effectiveness, it is ended in a military sense because Saddam Hussein has no air assets, no meaningful missile assets, and no real army assets that he can bring to bear once we have destroyed or effectively forced the rest to surrender.
General Traynor, variation on the same question to you. If the fight is carried to Iraq and Kuwait has fallen, is there any way that Saddam Hussein can recoup?
Not really. If we go into Iraq after him, even the forces that he has available to him in Iraq that would be torn to pieces as they'd come south to try to oppose us. So if we went into Iraq, he couldn't militarily stop us.
Other than mopping up, then, in your view, is it essentially over?
Yes.
General Traynor, Tony Cordesman, thank you both very much. We'll be back in just a moment. Met into the early hours of the morning and then again this afternoon, some of the 15 members have been pushing for a ceasefire that would let Iraqi troops retreat safely from Kuwait. So far, they're not making any progress. Here's ABC's David Ensor.
American and allied diplomats at the UN are blocking efforts by Cuba, Yemen, and others to get a Security Council vote on a call for a ceasefire. The Allies want promises in writing from Saddam Hussein first.
There has to be a very clear, formal, precise, written acceptance of these other resolutions, of all the 12 resolutions.
That would commit Iraq to recognizing the Emir of Kuwait's government, to acknowledging liability for damage done, and to conceding there may be trials for war crimes committed by Iraqi troops. An angry Iraqi ambassador charges that the Allies want to shoot Iraqis in the back as they withdraw and want to destroy Iraq.
They would not be happy to see a ceasefire or total withdrawal, a peaceful withdrawal from Kuwait. They are not interested in Kuwait or in peace or, for that matter, resolution of Security Council.
The Iraqi was so bitter at last night's closed meeting that he called Kuwait's ambassador the dwarf on my right. Don't gloat, he said, adding that the Kuwaitis' presence reminded him of a joke about the son of a donkey.
If any insult comes from Iraq, that is a compliment for me because, I mean, Iraq has been disgraced in the whole world.
Insults like that are unusual in a place where polite diplomatic language is the norm. The anger on both sides here shows how difficult it is going to be to make peace in the Gulf. David Ensor, ABC News at the United Nations.
In a moment, ABC's Bill Blakemore in Baghdad and heard a very different assessment of the war than the rest of us. ABC's Bill Blakemore is still there.
People in the center of Baghdad this morning had heard the early radio announcement that Iraq was withdrawing from Kuwait, and they were hopeful the war might now end.
We hope peace come as easy as quickly as possible.
And with Iraqi dignity intact.
30 countries against only one country. I think we made a good job.
Then at midday, Iraqis listened as Saddam Hussein himself said Iraqi forces were withdrawing and addressed Iraqi soldiers in the past tense, saying God was with you in your fight, and you were brave. At about 2:30 p.m., we thought we heard more heavy Allied bombing on Baghdad, but at least some of that turned out to be thunder from a passing rainstorm, sweeping through Baghdad on the wind which has been blowing steadily from the south for 2 days now. This wind has brought with it billows of dark, greasy mist which smells of oil. This new added worry for people here has left a sooty grime on outdoor surfaces. The rainwater collecting in the bottom of this hotel's swimming pool, which was green until yesterday, has turned black. The air seems a bit colder, and people here in Baghdad are wondering if it's because so little light has filtered through from the sun for 2 days now. People here still have no way of telling whether their afternoon has been turned into night by bombed oil refineries or ignited oil wells, or both. But concerns about this extraordinary air pollution took second place this afternoon in the minds of Baghdad's residents. Primary concerns here are about the fate of Iraqi soldiers and what Iraq's government will do next in this war. And repeated air attacks on Baghdad tonight kept telling people here that it's still not over. Bill Blakemore, ABC News in Baghdad.
That smoke and oily black rain, apparently from the burning oil fields in Kuwait, fell over Turkey today, nearly 600 miles away. Local officials advise residents to wash their fruits and vegetables. We'll have more news. Next segment of our broadcast, we're going to have more with Forrest Sawyer there. In Saudi Arabia today, workers continue to go through the rubble left by the deadliest attack of the war, the Scud missile, which hit a barrack for American troops last night, killed, as we said a little earlier, 28 and left 100 wounded. The victims were not frontline troops, but support and supply personnel. Among the dead, at least 2 from the 14th Quartermaster Detachment out of Greensburg, Pennsylvania. They had not been sent to fight, but to handle water purification. ABC's John McKenzie is in Pennsylvania tonight.
Ever since the Civil War, the people of Greensburg have sent troops into battle. Today they learned, as they have before, some would not be coming home.
I was really shocked, because I thought the Patriots were doing their job, and if they could stop them in Israel, they should have stopped them in Saudi Arabia.
There's an attachment to everybody that's had to go over there. You know, it's like, hey, those are our people. You know, they're fighting for our rights.
Here in this town of 30,000, some were anxious, others frustrated today, waiting to hear just who had been hurt and who had been spared. When the 14th Detachment headed for the Middle East, people here admit they knew there were dangers. But they also figured this is a Quartermaster Corps. It's stationed in the rear. It should be relatively safe.
You're going into a hostile environment. Nobody is safe in a hostile environment. Combat is combat, whether it be on the front lines or whether it be in the rear.
A month ago, the 69 reservists, including 13 women, were sent to Fort Lee, Virginia to train in water purification methods. Reservists like 19-year-old Edwin McCauley.
I am nervous a little bit, but I'm just taking day by day to make it easier on myself.
McCauley and the rest of the detachment had been in the Gulf only 6 days when the Scud missile hit their barracks. Last night, he called his parents in Greensburg to say he had been cut, but was otherwise all right.
It was a very emotional conversation. He had gone through one hell of an emotional situation.
This evening, Army officials say it could be days before this reserve unit and this town learn the full extent of their loss. John McKenzie, ABC News, Greensburg, Pennsylvania.
In a moment, when our special edition of World News Tonight continues on most of these stations, we'll be talking again with ABC's Forrest Sawyer in Kuwait City, and we'll have a report on a major tank battle for control of the Kuwait City airport.
This special edition of World News Tonight with Peter Jennings continues.
First, a review of the highlights. This morning, Saddam Hussein himself went on Baghdad radio to say that all his troops would be withdrawing from Kuwait and that, God willing, the pullout will be completed today. His words. President Bush called the speech an outrage and said the only way to end the war was for Saddam Hussein to renounce his claim to Kuwait and accept all the other UN resolutions, which he has not done. And so the fighting continues. The U.S. High Command says even though the Iraqi army is in full retreat, many of them are trying to leave with their weapons, and those are the ones still being attacked by coalition forces. And while thousands more Iraqis surrendered today, others are, as we said, continuing to fight. One such battle has been going on at Kuwait City Airport, and ABC's Forrest Sawyer has made it into the Kuwaiti capital, Kuwait City. how do the Kuwaitis, I think I know the answer to this, but how do the Kuwaitis feel at being liberated, those you've come across?
They are equally exuberant. One rather telling phrase. The man whose house this is, as a matter of fact, said to me, "We went to sleep Iraqis, and when we